tell me a little bit about your backstory.
So my sport was kayaking. I competed at 2 Olympic Games and I won 6 world titles in marathon kayak racing. And I then, at the highest point in my career, I was about 25 years old. I had fulfilled that childhood ambition of becoming an Olympian. I had 3 world titles behind me. I thought that it was going to go on forever. I was on cloud 9. And then my world quite literally fell apart around me. And I was diagnosed with an illness called chronic fatigue syndrome. And to cut a very long story short, I was told that there was no treatment, there was no cure, and I would never race again. And that was actually the biggest setback of my career. Obviously, it was devastating. It was the biggest challenge that I've ever experienced. And ironically, it was actually the experience that I learned the most from. And it probably informs most, the biggest part of my work that I do now around resilience and building trust in high performing teams and a lot of my work. And so to cut another long story short, I actually went on to recover from the illness, and I did get back to training, and I went on to win another 3 world titles and compete at the Beijing Olympic Games in 2008. And what I do now is share all those lessons that I learned from the world of sport and share them in the business world to help others excel at what they do.
I mean, in particular, 2020 and this year has been hard on everyone. But what I'd love to know is what positive outcomes has this year given you?
I love that question because you're focusing on what's positive, and so much of what we're hearing right now is the hardships and the challenges that everyone's facing in 2020 and going forward in 2021. And one of the things for me on a personal note actually is that, so I've got 2 young primary school age children, and obviously, we're trying to work. My husband's full-time worker and I'm working, and we've got to try and homeschool. And as hard as that is, don't get me wrong, it's really tough. It's actually in some way really nice to see what they're doing, the way that they learn, and quite often I've always thought, I wish I could be a fly on the wall in the classroom and see what they're like and how they behave and how they interact with the other kids. And I spy on the Google Meet meeting sometimes, and I get to get that insight. So that's actually really lovely. But don't get me wrong, I have no intention of swapping what I do for being a primary school teacher. I mean, hats off to those teachers. But that's been really lovely. On a work front, right at the start of the pandemic, back in March last year, one of our biggest clients asked us to deliver weekly webinars over a 6-month period for their clients to really support them in through that really challenging time. And so together with my wellbeing team at Beyond the Barriers, my training consultancy, we put together a series of webinars to offer their staff, and we dropped the sessions that we had been doing for them before, and we really developed content that was so focused on what was going to support these people through this challenging time. And we were covering stuff, titles such as managing fear and anxiety. My nutritionist was doing healthy immune system, healthy lunches at home, fit and active at home with our sports fitness guy. I did one on staying sane through the crisis, sane standing for strong, active, enabling and energetic. And, this is an organization of 3,000 people. So, and, it really felt like we were able to help these people and make a difference to them in that really challenging time. And of course, I always hope that we make a difference and we help and support people in all of our work. But that first 6 months, I'm sure you felt it, of the pandemic, it was just like nothing any of us had ever experienced, and it was stressful, it was challenging. And it was just so rewarding to feel like we could make a difference and help people and support them through that time. So that was a lovely thing that I got from those first 6 months.
Your keynote about resilience, success in the face of adversity, what's your biggest tips on overcoming adversity?
So I've got a few different tips, but I'm going to share with you my top 2. And it relates to the illness that I experienced that I mentioned earlier, chronic fatigue syndrome, this illness that was devastating, had me going from being at the highest level in my sport to rock bottom. And I remember really probably at the depths of the illness, a friend of mine, she said to me, how could this be worse? And I was like, really? How could this be worse? It doesn't get any worse than this. In my mind, in that moment, it was the worst it could ever be. You know, I was midway through an Olympic cycle. I was 6 months away from the World Championships. You know, I'd spent my life training for this. I was an athlete. This is what I did. It just couldn't have got any worse. It was devastating. And so at first the question really threw me. And then I recalled stories of other sufferers of CFS who were bedridden. They were confined to their houses. And it made me realize that as bad as my symptoms were, and yes, the illness was preventing me from living my life the way I was used to, actually, it wasn't a terminal illness. I wasn't dying. And the symptoms could have been a whole lot worse. And that really helped me to put things in perspective. And it forced me to focus on being grateful for what I did have and what I could do. And so I really encourage others when they're facing some kind of adverse situation that they don't enjoy, they don't like, they want to change, but they can't, then to focus on how it could be worse. And it feels like a negative thing to do, but actually when you write some of those things down or discuss it, it really helps to create a different perspective. And that really works for me. My second tip is to accept and move on. And again, with the illness, I didn't like the illness, but I had to learn to accept it. You know, it's a little bit like the lockdown that we're experiencing right now and the restrictions from COVID-19. I don't know anyone who's loving it, but we have to learn to accept it. And I'm not talking about resignation. I'm talking about accepting that this is my current reality. And yes, the illness I experienced wasn't easy, but fighting it wasn't going to help me. And so sometimes in order to help us accept a situation, it's useful to sort of get it off your chest, to express what you're feeling, whatever's bothering you, usually expressing those emotions. And then once you've accepted it and you've learned from it, then it's time to move on. And when you're ready to move on, you need to ask yourself, it's usually helpful to ask, what do I want now? And quite often you only have two choices, either to stay where you are and keep the same problem alive, or cut your losses and formulate a new plan to move forward. And formulating the plan is crucial because without the plan, you end up returning to the same problem with the same situation. So ask yourself, how could this be worse, to manage your perspective, and then accept and learn and move on. Those are my tips.
And I guess as a multi-world champion, you must have dealt with a lot of pressure. So how do you remain calm, focused, and able to make great decisions in pressure situations?
Yeah, so the sport of marathon kayak racing is fueled by resilient decision-making under pressure. It's a little bit like being in a road cycling race when you're in the peloton and the racers are moving positions constantly and you're having to think quickly and correctly under pressure. And so throughout the year, we would always have specific training sessions where we would play out different race situations. And so we're preparing ourselves for lots of different eventualities that could happen in a race. And that helps us to be robust in our decision making when it comes to race day, because over the course of a year, we have then played out lots of different scenarios. And we've seen what could happen. Should I move this way? Should I go here? Should I go there? What will happen if you do this? And when I've played all of that out, I then feel when I turn up to the race, I feel confident and prepared that I am going to make the right decision in the heat of the moment. And so then in the days and the weeks leading up to the World Championships, together with my coach, we are planning the tactics for the race. We're preparing the plan and the strategy. And of course, we don't know how the race is going to pan out. I don't know what my competitors are planning. There's uncertainty. But remember, where there's uncertainty, there's opportunity. And sometimes we need others to help us see it. And so together with my coach, we plan for a range, we anticipate a range of possible scenarios, and we make plans accordingly. And that is what helps me to be robust in my decision making and helps me to perform under pressure. Because basically, if you come across a pressure situation that you've never experienced before and you haven't prepared for it and the chips are down, chances are you'll choke. But if you've planned for it and you've prepared and seen what eventualities might play out, then you feel confident and ready to prepare to make that right decision. So when I'm helping, working with clients who want to improve their resilient decision making under pressure, every coaching session we'll spend a few minutes just role playing different scenarios that could play out. I'll ask them what if questions, and I'll ask them to predict what could happen and how they handle it, and they capture that. And so then they're ready and they feel prepared when it actually happens. And so that's my advice. Because and to a lot of people it might look like, you know, when I'm in the middle of the race, it looks like I'm adept at making the right decision and making the right move in the heat of the moment. But it's only because I've prepared for it and I visualized it and watched a movie of it in my mind 1,000 times. And that's what makes me able and ready to make the right decision in the moment.
And finally, I mean, if you had one piece of advice to give, what would it be?
So I've talked a lot about resilience, and one of the key characteristics of being resilient is confidence. So I would encourage people to invest their time in identifying what their strengths are, to get them on the tips of your fingers. Because when I work with clients and we spend time working on their strengths and identifying what they are, we see huge improvements in their confidence. And that's crucial when you're under pressure. Because otherwise, if I was in a race and I'm sat on the start line and I don't know what my strengths are, I'll be focused on my weaknesses and all the things that I need to avoid doing. And then my confidence, my chances of performing at my best are slim. My confidence is fragile and I'm not going to get the best out of myself. And so I encourage people to identify what those strengths are, because then when you hit a pressure situation, you will know, whether that's an important meeting with a client or delivering a big presentation, you'll know what contribution you're going to make and the value that you're going to bring. And when you know what you've got in your locker and that you've got the resources within you to deliver under pressure and to cope with that situation, you're going to be far more confident and far more resilient. So that's my advice. Work on identifying what those strengths are, have them on the tips of your fingers to build your confidence.